Welcome to this episode of SDI Encounters, a podcast from SDI, the home of spiritual companionship. I'm Matt Whitney. Thank you for listening. Learn more about our work and the work of spiritual companionship on our website, sdicompanions.org. In this conversation, SDI Executive Director Rev. SeiFu Singh-Molares and myself discuss how in challenging times we can learn how to use these challenges as gateways to deeper understanding, awareness, and spiritual growth. Our work as spiritual directors and companions involves helping others through their own challenges, as well as tending to our own. We believe we can do more than just survive difficult times. We can thrive. Reverend SeiFu's full written reflection is available in our Listen publication, which offers reflections on spiritual direction and companionship. It is freely available to all and can be accessed on the SDI website, sdicompanions.org. Reverend SeiFu, for this January issue of Listen, your reflection is drawn from a Dharma talk that you gave at your Sangha, your Zen Buddhist temple community, and I wonder if you can speak to that and your inspirations for that.
The topic that I picked for that Dharma talk, which you'll all be able to read about here in the accompanying article in this issue of Listen, is very much in line with our theme this year of navigating difficulties and challenges and ongoing difficulties and challenges in our world, in our environment, and as spiritual directors and companions. And rather than just learning to tolerate or endure or be resilient through these challenges, how to use them as gateways to expanding our practice and our calling and our awareness. So that's really the background behind it. The Dharma talk was conceived in response to the theme that we're embracing for our 35th anniversary. And in it, I speak about the koan, just the distilled koan is, what will you be when the trees wither and the leaves fall? And the answer is, given in the koan, is you embody the golden wind. And so I speak about how the associations we have with this season in the Northern Hemisphere, winter, is one of death and decay and things falling away. It makes me think of our deaths in our own lives, of people that we love dearly. And, puts us in a melancholy mood, maybe even depressed in some ways, seasonally affected depression. And yet the leaves fall, but they don't disappear. They go on to new purposes and new incarnations. And I think that when our loved ones fall away, and when we fall away, it actually creates openings, very important openings for our development. And so I'm pondering all of that and its deep relevance to our work as spiritual directors and companions, because we deal with this so-called death all the time. And I say so-called because it's really not a death. It's very much a transmutation, transition. It resolves in whatever ways we each think it resolves, into heaven, into reincarnation, into whatever each of us might believe. It's a transition, but it is certainly not a stop or an end. It's actually very much a new beginning. And these are not mere words or platitudes. It's actually, so anyway, so that's a long way to answer your question.
Thank you. Can you say more about how it's not enough to just be resilient? It's not enough to just kind of weather the storms. It's not enough to just get through dark times, but Your invitation is that there's more, that we can thrive, we can flourish. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I think for me, being resilient means toughing it out, right? And toughing it out means putting on a thick protective layer around us, like an armor, and where we're able to withstand whatever is thrown our way. And this is an understandable mechanism for our protection if we're spiritual first responders or actually actual first responders in a hospital or hospice workers or any number of other ways that we deal with the people that we relate to the people that we accompany, that we're actually walling ourselves off when we say we become resilient. So we're living into being tough, into being so tough that we can withstand anything. And my invitation, and I think the invitation of this koan, this Zen koan from the 12th century, is to actually be even more vulnerable, more open, more receptive to the fact that these transitions are actually openings into and blessings in many ways, even as counterintuitive as that might sound, for our spiritual life, for our spiritual growth, and for our ability to connect with the deepest essence, the higher ground of being, God, the universe, however we might refer to it. So I'm moving away from resilience and its associations with toughness and into openness and vulnerability, still with some boundaries, because I think those are important. It's important to protect ourselves. There's a reason for resilience, but it's really opening up to the possibilities rather than, in some senses, walling ourselves off and shutting ourselves off from the experience of the world.
It's an interesting paradox, though, in that one opens and has a posture of vulnerability, and that this actually strengthens and toughens us, as you say.
Yeah.
The more heartbreak we allow, the stronger our heart gets. Is that a
Well, yeah, I think what it is, and everything's about, it's not a paradox. It's just, it's both things. Of course, we need to be resilient in some ways because we need to protect ourselves. And if we don't protect ourselves, we're not going to be very effective as first responders, as spiritual first responders, because we won't be, everything will invade us and we'll become burned out and non-functional very quickly. So there is a need to have healthy boundaries. There is a need to have some distance and some perspective, but there is equally at the same time a need for vulnerability and openness. And I guess the invitation of my Dharma talk, of this article in Listen, is to allow ourselves to be cracked open. And it's not like we have much of a choice. I mean, the world is going through, compounded changes and difficulties and wars and strife and pandemics, and all seemingly without end. They just continue and continue and continue. And so how do we thrive in that environment? How do we, instead of walling ourselves off, how do we learn to thrive while still protecting ourselves? So the paradox you point to is very real. We need to be able to do both, to be resilient enough, to be tend to ourselves as well as we tend to others. We need to be able to tend to ourselves as well as we tend to others. In fact, one depends on the other. The better we can take care of ourselves, the better we can take care of others.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You and I have not heard you use this term before, talking about spiritual direction and companionship as spiritual first responders.
Yes.
I like that. And maybe you could say more about how a spiritual companion, what their posture is as a first responder. Like, what are the tools at play? What are they facing? But also just to piggyback on what you just said about, we have to care for we have to be first responders to ourselves as well.
Yeah, the notion of being a spiritual first responder is a consequence of my own practice as a spiritual companion, and those of many people who I'm close to. And so and you included among them, of course. And so I have of the people that I companion, which is the few that I have the time to do this for, is that many of them are in spiritual crisis. In fact, I would say most of them are in spiritual crisis when they come to me, and a spiritual emergency, right, where things have gotten the search for ultimate meaning and purpose has become so loud. It's shifted from being the little voice in the background that reminds us once in a while that there's a deeper meaning and a deeper purpose to our lives. It has gone from being a little voice to being a very loud and very demanding voice, one that overwhelms them, me, us, so much that we have no alternative but to listen to it and to try to address what it's saying to us. And so I think this is, all of us spiritual directors and companions meet with people who are in crisis. Not all of the people that we meet are in crisis. Some come to us for different reasons. They want to refine something. They want to explore something. They may be well grounded and well, and balanced and filled with equanimity. But at least a portion of them, in my case, a majority of the people that I see are in some kind of spiritual crisis. And so I speak to them as a spiritual first responder, kind of someone who lends them a helping hand, who provides that mirror, who provides that support so that they can find their way, not just find their way through, as in resilience, but find the opening that their heartbreak is inviting them into.
So I want to keep on this sort of where we hold both, like both this openness and vulnerability and this heartbreak, but also this anchoring presence for those who need us as spiritual companions. And I wonder, because I imagine many of our members and our community are feeling some spiritual crisis for themselves, and yet when they are sitting with other people, listening to others, they have to kind of set that aside or at least guard that a little bit. I actually think that helps. Like when we're tending to others, when we're being of service to others, it gives us some space from the part of us that is in crisis. And I wonder if you've experienced if you've had those experiences yourself or as a spiritual companion, maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, yes, I know I hear what you're saying. I know what you're saying. And yes, there is that. But I also find that my own heartbreak and my own loss, as you will see when you read the article, very much informs my approach to others, into their heartbreak, to their loss, right? To the death of loved ones, for instance, which is something that we all have to deal with. No one escapes this, right? It happens to all of us. And it gives us, spiritual directors and companions, an authentic grounding to meet the people that we're accompanying where they are in their own heartbreak and loss. You can't really speak to heartbreak and loss unless you've experienced it yourself. And it's not the same for any two people. It's different for each of us. It's unique to each of us in many ways. And yet there are a lot of similarities. And so I find that I respond when I'm accompanied by others to people who really can say, even if they don't say it explicitly, where I can feel their authenticity, where when they tell me something, if I say, well, dear companion, dear director, what do you think about this? And they say, oh, no, it's not up to me, it's up to you. I say, no, I really want to hear what you have to say. They say, well, I've experienced this too. And this is, and this is what I learned from it. And this is how I navigated this. That really speaks to me. And I've experienced this with the people that I accompany as well, that they respond well to that authenticity that is by virtue of experience, by virtue of all of our common experience with heartbreak and loss.
Yeah.
What we call love, which is born of attachment, is what I say in the article, right? That we define love as attachment. We're attached to our partners. We're attached to our parents. We're attached to our children. We're attached to our friends. And the more attached we are to them, the more we say that we love them. So we equate love and attachment by definition, right? I mean, we're born in the womb of our mother. I can't think of any deeper attachment than that between a child and a mother. And it's the womb, and it's the womb of the universe, and it's the womb of attachment as well. It's defined by attachment. And yet the attachment also reveals an attachment to something beyond itself, right? And that's why I say in the article, as you will see towards the end, that we can grow into love and grow in our love because of the people who passed away in our lives. That not only does it not take something away, it actually gives us something greater. It gives us something greater. And it grows our love. And in fact, that love is so strong that it's there even when we're not there. It's still there. And so that's something to ponder. And that can be translated into the particular religious or faith tradition or spiritual orientation that any of us have. We all feel it. But it is there love? There's that famous philosophical, does a tree make a sound when it falls if there's no one to hear it? And I'm not going to answer that question, but I'll say, is love still there when we're not there? And I will answer that question and say, yes, love is still there when we're not there. Because what this us that's speaking to each other right now continues in very meaningful and important ways, even when these bodies fall away.
That was my last question, was the so-called deaths that we experience. That's what you named them, the so-called deaths, because
and so I would say this so-called death is actually a birth or rebirth. The other day with one of the people that I companion, I said, this death is actually a baptism, right? It's a rebirth. It's a baptism. It's a anointment. It's a transition. It's an initiation, right? It's an initiate. Our death is an initiation for us and for the people around us in very important ways. And that may sound counterintuitive because we equate death with endings and finalities and things that terminate, things that end. And I actually think that the opposite is very much true, that there is that this so-called death is one of the biggest openings that we all experience. And that's a matter of faith for each of us, our own faith to translate into what that means for you, right? How you speak about that is, are you resolving into God? Are you resolving into heaven? Are you resolving into nirvana? Are you resolving into the universe? Are you resolving into the wind or the leaf that falls onto the ground?
And this resolving is a process that starts now.
I think this process is continuous. I mean, we're all arising and falling away. All sentient beings are arising and falling away, and yet some linger. I mentioned in the article also, that we're all deeply and intimately connected to religious and spiritual figures, many of whom have been dead for thousands of years. and yet they're very present and very alive to us right now. So much so that many of us live our lives in accordance with what we have gleaned of their wisdom.
Thank you. That's beautifully said. And
Okay.
I will just close and say that we hope that if you're listening, you will check out the article that Reverend SeiFu wrote, and I created some art for it for this issue of Listen. It's available on our website, sdicompanions.org, and we hope you'll check it out. Thanks. If you're enjoying this podcast and you want to help us share and spread the word about the life-giving practice of spiritual companionship, you can help us out by subscribing to this podcast on our website. You could give us a like or even write us a review. Thank you for listening. This is Matt Whitney with Spiritual Directors International. Thanks again for listening. Your time and your presence here are deeply appreciated. If you liked this show and would like us to continue making them, please do subscribe now while it's fresh on your mind. Also, we would love to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your comments and suggestions to the email address podcast@sdiworld.org. SDI is the home of spiritual companionship. Learn more about us and our work on our website, sdicompanions.org.